Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into skin in the game.
Ah, yes, that fascinating concept from Nassim Taleb.
You got it. We're taking on excerpts from his book, all thanks to you, our amazing listeners. It's about what it really means, to have something at stake when you make a choice, the good idea, the bad that can come from it.
And it goes way deeper than just the financial risks, which is what a lot of folks think of at first.
Oh, for sure. We're talking accountability, keeping things fair.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack. Actually, Taleb kicks things off way back in time. Ancient Babylon. Hammurabi's Code.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Those laws literally carved in stone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like those massive tablets you see in history books.
And those weren't just for decoration. They were put front and center so everyone, from the top dogs to the everyday folks, knew exactly what would happen if they stepped out of line. The big idea woven throughout the code is that things had to be balanced. People faced the music for their actions, and it stopped them from trying to shift the blame or risk onto someone else.
Makes sense. So, let's say a builder puts up a house and it collapses, someone gets hurt.
Yeah.
They wouldn't just get a warning, right?
Absolutely not. Hammurabi's code made those builders own up to shoddy work. There are even parts of the code that call out reckless doctors. Shows you the skin in the game idea is ancient, and it touches every part of life, not just Wall Street.
Gotcha. So how does all this ancient stuff connect to the world today?
Well, Taleb says this old school principle is alive and kicking even on Wall Street. He points to what he calls the Bob Rubin trade, named after a former bigwig in the U.S. Treasury. It's basically when people grab a ton of rewards, but all the risk lands on someone else, a lot of times the taxpayers.
Kind of like keeping all the profits, but making everyone else deal with the losses, right?
Bingo. And you see this pattern outside of finance, too. Think about environmental rules, where some companies make big bucks by polluting, but then the public's stuck with the cleanup bill.
Yeah.
And the health problems.
True. So how can we tell who really has skin in the game in these situations? Is it just about who takes the blame when things go south?
It's a little more complicated than that. Taleb's big on revealed preferences. What people do outweighs what they say every time. Watch how they act, especially when things get tough or there's risk involved. That tells you what they're really about. Would you trust stock advice from someone who wouldn't invest in it themselves?
Not a chance. It's like when someone recommends a restaurant but then says, "Oh, I've never actually eaten there." Suddenly their recommendation doesn't mean much.
Exactly. Actions are the real story.
Actions over words. Got it. But how does this revealed preference thing play out over a long period of time?
That's where we get into the intelligence of time. Time's a filter, right? It sifts through all the ideas, the systems we build, even how we do things. What's left is what's truly strong and can take a hit. The stuff that lasts for ages, it's been through the ringer, it's faced tons of risk and come out on top.
So if something stood the test of time, a classic book, a recipe that everyone loves, even a way of solving problems,
yeah,
it's probably worth paying attention to.
You got it. The intelligence of time is like a stamp of approval from history itself. It tells you what's likely to stick around and what's just a flash in the pan.
That's a cool way to think about it.
Wow.
Now, here's something that really got me thinking in the book, the whole minority rule idea. Sounds kind of backward, but Taleb says a small group, if they're really stubborn, can actually call the shots for a much bigger majority. How does that even work?
It's wild, right? Let's say you've got a small town and just a handful of folks refuse to eat anything with GMOs. They might seem like a tiny group, but they can actually shift the whole food system. Restaurants might change their menus, stores stock different stuff, all to cater to that little group that just won't budge.
It's like they've got the whole system by the tail because they're so set in their ways.
You could say that. And we see this all over, from how customs spread to the tech we use. Even if most people aren't crazy about the change, they go along with it because it's easier than fighting the few who are super stubborn.
So it's not always the loudest voice or the biggest crowd that wins. Sometimes it's about a few dedicated folks who dig in their heels.
Exactly. Flips the script on how we think change happens. Sticking to your guns, being persistent, that can really shake things up.
Okay, we've covered ancient laws, Wall Street, and stubborn folks. Now let's get to those who try to control things but don't have any skin in the game themselves. Taleb calls them interventionistas. Can you break that down for us?
Sure thing. An interventionista is someone who, they love to intervene, right? They stick their nose into complicated situations. But here's the kicker. They don't actually face the consequences if things go wrong. Think about some government official who's all gung-ho for a new economic policy, but then if it tanks and we have a recession, They don't personally lose a dime.
So they're kind of shielded from the real-world mess their decisions might create.
Exactly. They're up in their ivory tower making pronouncements, pushing policies. But they're not on the ground feeling the heat if everything blows up. That lack of personal risk can lead to some seriously messed up views and zero accountability.
And this whole out-of-touch thing, it's not just government, right?
Oh, no, not at all. Take a consultant, for example. Advises a company to restructure, but if it leads to layoffs, losses, they're not the ones cleaning up the mess. Or those social media influencers pushing a certain lifestyle. They don't deal with the downsides their followers might experience.
It really makes you think, When someone's in a position of power, are they just talking a good game or do their actions match up? Do they have real skin in the game when they're making decisions that affect us?
Those are the million-dollar questions. When you can spot who truly has skin in the game, it helps you figure out if their advice is legit, if they really believe what they're preaching, and what the impact might be on everyone else. It's a crucial tool to navigate this crazy world where everyone's got an agenda. It really does make you think. And that ties into another concept Taleb talks about, the silver rule.
Ooh, this is like the golden rule, but with a bit of a twist. Because to be honest, the golden rule's always felt kind of, too idealistic. Like, what if someone actually likes being treated badly?
It's a good question, and the silver rule is more about, minimizing harm. It's less about this perfect back and forth. The idea is you shouldn't do things to others that you wouldn't want done to you. So it's more about, avoiding doing bad stuff rather than trying to perfectly mirror the good.
Okay, that makes more sense. So it's more about boundaries, right? Not stepping on toes, not causing harm, instead of trying to guess what someone else would like. In the real world, that makes a lot more sense.
Right. Less about some perfect ideal, more about how people actually are, respecting each other's space and knowing that sometimes, even when we try to do good, things can backfire.
I'm into that. Now, this next thing really jumped out at me, this idea of causal opacity. Sounds kind of complicated, but I think it's something we see all the time without even realizing it.
Yeah, causal opacity basically means that in these big, complicated systems, it's hard to see the direct link between cause and effect. We might think we know what'll happen when we do something, but then reality throws a curveball.
It's like when you make what seems like a tiny decision, and then suddenly, bam, it triggers this whole chain reaction you never saw coming.
Exactly. And that's where having skin in the game becomes so important. When we actually deal with the results of our choices, good or bad, it forces us to confront how messy these systems really are. We learn from those screw-ups.
Makes you realize that even the smartest folks can get it wrong. Sometimes you got to just jump in and DO stuff, even if it means messing up along the way. That's how we learn.
Right on. Actions speak louder than words, as they say. Think about it. Someone's always promising to help you with something, but they never actually do. Their actions, or in this case, inaction, tell the real story, not their words.
Yep, like put your money where your mouth is. If you're not willing to back up what you say, those words don't mean much.
Nailed it. And this doesn't just apply to how we deal with each other, it's everywhere. Business deals, promises from politicians, even those big scientific theories. The ones that hold up are the ones that have been tested in the real world and proven to work.
Okay, so real-world results are what matters, not just talk. Remember how we were talking about the intelligence of time earlier? Well, Taleb links this to skin in the game in a pretty mind-blowing way. He says it actually helps define what's rational.
It's a real head-scratcher at first. What might seem totally irrational to someone looking from the outside could actually be a super effective strategy, one that's been honed over centuries of trial and error.
So something that looks crazy or illogical at first glance might actually be a sign of deep wisdom passed down through generations.
Exactly. It reminds us to be humble, right? Don't just dismiss something because it doesn't fit into our neat little boxes of how things should be. There might be a deeper logic there that we're just not seeing yet.
It's like those old wives' tales, you know?
Yeah.
The stuff our grandparents would tell us. Some of them sounded nuts, but then you'd try them out, and they'd actually work.
Yeah.
Maybe there's more to these traditional ways of doing things than we give them credit for.
Perfect example. Taleb even says that going against nature, ignoring what's worked for ages because we think we know better, that can actually be a form of irrationality.
So blindly following the latest trend, even if it contradicts stuff that stood the test of time, might not always be the smartest move.
Not necessarily. Sometimes sticking with what seems irrational, especially if it's rooted in a deep understanding of how things work, can be the best choice in the long run.
Okay, got to keep an open mind, consider all the angles. But does that mean every single decision we make has to be run through this skin in the game filter seems a little exhausting, to be honest.
Good point. Taleb isn't saying we should go to extremes, putting ourselves out there for every little thing. He's drawing a line between actions with big consequences and those that are more, well, low impact.
So it's more about being really critical when the stakes are high, right? Like when we're talking about those big systems we talked about earlier, or decisions that could have a domino effect on others.
Exactly. Be extra careful when the people making the calls aren't the ones who'll feel the pain if things go sideways. Think back to those interventionistas we talked about. They love to make choices that affect a ton of people, but they face very little personal risk.
So it's about holding people accountable, especially those who have the power to make decisions that impact all of our lives.
That's a huge part of it. And it's also about being aware of our own limitations, knowing that sometimes, even with the best intentions, our actions can have unintended consequences.
Okay, skin in the game isn't about obsessing over every tiny decision. It's more of a mindset, a way of looking at things, especially when a lot's riding on the outcome. We talked about the intelligence of time and how it helps us see what's really strong and what's fragile. How does that connect to learning from our mistakes?
Taleb has this cool idea. He calls it via negativa. He argues that systems, like biological systems, social systems, even the tech we use, they all learn and evolve by getting rid of errors.
Via negativa sounds kind of mysterious. Can you break that down a bit?
Imagine a sculptor chipping away at a block of marble to reveal the statue inside. It's not about adding more, it's about taking away what doesn't work. When it comes to learning, it means figuring out what our mistakes are, where our biases are, those flawed assumptions we make, and getting rid of them.
So it's about subtracting rather than adding, huh?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this ties back into skin in the game because when we actually face those consequences, the screw-ups, it forces us to look at what went wrong and find a better way. It's through experience, through trial and error, even those painful moments when we realize we messed up. That's how we learn.
Right. You learn more from your failures than your successes, right? But it seems like in our world, everyone's all about celebrating success and hiding those mistakes.
That's true. And Taleb argues that being afraid to fail actually slows us down.
Yeah.
If we want to create systems that are tougher, more adaptable, more innovative, we have to be willing to admit when we get things wrong and learn from those blunders.
So embrace those failures.
Yeah.
See them as a chance to learn.
Yeah. Not about glorifying failure, but seeing its role in how we grow.
Makes sense. Okay, so via negativa is about learning by cutting away the stuff that doesn't work. Now, another thing Taleb keeps coming back to is symmetry. Seems simple enough, but he uses it in some pretty unexpected ways.
Symmetry is a fundamental principle, right? It's in the laws of physics, in our own bodies, and Taleb says it's also crucial for creating systems that are fair and just.
So it's not just about things looking balanced or pretty. It's about making sure there's a sense of fairness, like a give and take, in the way we interact with each other, with the world.
Exactly. And this idea has been around forever. Remember Hammurabi's code? It was all about that symmetrical justice, the punishment fitting the crime. It was about preventing people from taking advantage of others or pushing risk onto those who are less powerful.
Karma, right. What goes around comes around.
That's the idea. And Taleb argues that this symmetry principle should apply not just to individuals, but to everything. Institutions, organizations, even entire countries. Remember the silver rule we talked about earlier?
Yeah, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Or the silver rule version, don't do to others what you wouldn't want done to you. Kind of a negative spin on the golden rule.
Exactly. And Taleb says this should guide how nations deal with each other too. Respect, avoiding actions that could harm and destabilize other countries.
So a more balanced world, right?
Yeah.
Where everyone's held accountable and there's this mutual respect and understanding.
That's the goal. And Taleb argues that skin in the game is crucial to making that happen. When everyone has a stake in the outcome, they're more likely to act responsibly and think about the long-term impact of what they do.
Okay, so symmetry. It's about a fairer world, a more balanced world. Now, something else we touched on earlier, this revealed preferences idea. I'd love to dig a little deeper there.
It's powerful stuff, really makes you think. It suggests that our actions speak volumes about what we truly believe, much more than our words ever could.
So, like, we might say one thing, but then DO something totally different.
Yeah.
Like someone who's all about saving the planet, but drives a gas-guzzling car.
Perfect example. Their actions tell the real story, even if they don't consciously realize the contradiction. This applies to everything. How we spend our money, who we vote for, even how we treat each other. Our actions are a much more reliable indicator of what we truly value than our words or even our thoughts.
Just like peeking into our subconscious, right?
Yeah.
Seeing what's really driving us, even if we're not fully aware of it ourselves.
You got it. And this is important for how we evaluate information, make decisions, even how we understand history. We need to look beyond the surface, beyond the speeches and promises, and pay attention to what people are actually doing. Their actions will tell you their true motivations much more reliably than any fancy theory or eloquent speech.
Okay, revealed preferences. A way to cut through the BS and get to the heart of the matter. Now, you mentioned earlier how skin in the game can actually help define what's rational. Can you unpack that a bit more?
This is where things get really interesting. It flips the traditional idea of rationality on its head. Taleb says what might seem irrational to someone on the outside could actually be a super effective strategy, one that's been shaped by generations of experience and adaptation.
So, what looks counterintuitive or even illogical on the surface might actually be a sign of deep wisdom built upon a long history of trial and error.
Exactly. Think about those traditions that have been passed down for ages, certain farming techniques, ancient remedies, even social customs. They might not have a clear scientific explanation, but they've survived because they work. They've been tested and refined through countless real-world applications, and their continued existence is a testament to their effectiveness.
So rather than dismissing these practices as, irrational or backward, we should consider the possibility that they hold valuable knowledge that we haven't fully grasped yet.
That's the key. Taleb argues that true rationality is about survival, about navigating a world that's complex and unpredictable in a way that promotes our well-being and longevity. And sometimes, the most rational choice is the one that seems counterintuitive or even illogical based on our current understanding.
It's like those old sayings, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. A stitch in time saves 9. They might sound simple, but they're packed with practical wisdom.
Exactly. And Taleb would say those sayings have survived because they've been tested and proven true through countless real-world experiences. They're not just empty phrases, but concentrated bits of wisdom that have helped people navigate the complexities of life for centuries.
So instead of blindly following the latest trends or trying to reinvent the wheel every time we face a problem, we should consider that the answers might already be out there, embedded in those traditions of practices that have stood the test of time.
That's a powerful insight. It's about recognizing the intelligence of time and being open to the possibility that we don't always know better than those who came before us.
Okay, so rationality, it's not just about logic or maximizing self-interest. It's about adapting to a world that's complex and often unpredictable, making choices that promote survival and well-being over the long run.
Well said. It's about recognizing the limits of our own knowledge and being willing to learn from experience, especially those experiences that involve risk and consequences. And it's about having the humility to acknowledge that sometimes the most rational choices are the ones that seem counterintuitive or even illogical based on our current understanding.
A lot to think about there. Now, I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier, the idea that skin in the game isn't always just about the individual. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, Taleb argues that our skin, it often extends beyond ourselves to include those we care about, our communities, even our broader social and cultural identities.
It's like those bumper stickers that say, think of the children.
That's a simple way to put it. But yeah, the idea is similar. Our actions often have ripple effects that go way beyond our immediate circle. We're not just isolated individuals making decisions in a vacuum. We're part of a complex web of relationships and interconnected systems.
So we need to think about the impact of our choices, not just on ourselves, but also on those around us.
Absolutely. And this has huge implications for how we think about responsibility, being accountable for our actions, even ethics. It's not just about looking out for number one, it's about recognizing that our actions are interconnected and can have unintended consequences for others.
Okay, so skin in the game isn't just about individual risk and reward, it's about the collective good, the responsibility we have to each other.
Right on. And Taleb argues that the sense of collective responsibility is often rooted in our shared identities, whether it's family, community, religion, or nationality.
So our skin is in the game not just because of our personal interests, but because of our connection to those larger groups and systems.
Exactly. And this has implications for how we think about loyalty, sacrifice, even conflict. We're often willing to take risks and make sacrifices for those we identify with, those who share our values and our sense of belonging.
Like soldiers risking their lives for their country, or parents making sacrifices for their children. They're not just acting out of self-interest, but out of a sense of duty and loyalty to something larger than themselves.
Perfect examples. And Taleb argues that this sense of collective skin in the game is essential for building strong and resilient communities. It fosters cooperation, trust, a willingness to work together for the common good.
Okay, so skin in the game goes beyond individual risk and reward. It's about those bonds that connect us to each other, to the larger systems we're a part of. It's about recognizing that our actions have ripple effects and that we have a responsibility to consider the impact of our choices on others.
Great summary. And it's a concept that has implications for how we think about everything, from our personal relationships to political systems to global challenges like climate change.
Now, there was this ancient legal code that Taleb talks about in the book that really illustrates this idea of collective skin in the game. What was it called again?
You're thinking of Lex Rhodia, a maritime legal code from the island of Rhodes. They were a major hub for trade in the ancient Mediterranean.
Lex Rhodia, right. It had something to do with ships and cargo, right?
Exactly. Imagine this. A ship's caught in a wild storm, and the captain, to save the ship and the crew, has to make a tough call. Throw some cargo overboard. So the question is, who eats the cost of the lost goods?
That's a tough spot. You'd think the owner of whatever got tossed would be pretty upset, right?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But Lex Rhodia had a clever solution. It said that if cargo had to be sacrificed for the common good, the cost would be shared proportionally by all the merchants whose goods were on board, not just the owner of the stuff that got lost.
So even though only some of them lost goods, everyone chipped in to cover the loss. Interesting way to handle it.
Right. It embodies this idea of shared risk, collective responsibility. Everyone benefited from the captain's decision to save the ship, so everyone shared the cost of that decision, even if their own goods were safe.
Like an early form of insurance, almost. Everyone contributes to a pool, and if someone experiences a loss, they get compensated from that pool.
Great analogy. Shows that this idea of shared responsibility isn't just some newfangled concept. It's been around for ages and reflects a deep understanding of how communities can work together to manage risk and take care of each other.
Makes you think about how we could apply those same principles to the problems we face today, like natural disasters or even economic crises. Maybe we need to rethink how we approach risk and responsibility, realizing that we're all connected and that sharing the burden can actually make us stronger as a society.
It's a powerful thought, shows how relevant these ancient principles still are. Sometimes the solutions to the toughest problems lie in rediscovering that old wisdom and adapting it to our modern world.
Okay, so shared risk, collective responsibility, concepts that go way back, reflected in those old legal codes like Lex Rhodia. Now, Taleb also applies skin in the game to something that might seem a little unexpected, the spread of religions. What's he getting at there?
Taleb argues that the success of some religions, especially the ones that have spread far and wide and lasted for centuries, can be partly attributed to the unwavering commitment, even the stubbornness, of their followers.
So it's not just about the message itself being appealing, but about the dedication, the persistence of those who believe it.
Exactly. Taleb suggests that those who are willing to make sacrifices, stand up for their beliefs, even face persecution for their faith, are more likely to pass those beliefs on to future generations.
It's like they're putting their skin in the game by showing how deeply they believe, and that authenticity resonates with others.
That's a great way to put it. And you see this dynamic not just in religion, but in social movements, political ideologies, even the adoption of new technologies. The folks who are all in, who put their reputations and resources on the line, they often have a huge impact on the direction of history.
It's like the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Exactly. The ones who make noise, challenge the status quo, and show they're not backing down, they often end up shaping the world, even if they start out as a small and seemingly insignificant group.
Okay, so skin in the game helps explain why some ideas stick around and spread, while others just fade away. It's not just the power of the idea, but the passion and commitment of those who believe in it. Now, I remember that Taleb also uses this lens to look at the relationship between employers and employees, and he makes some pretty controversial statements. Can you remind me what he says about that?
Taleb argues that, and this might ruffle some feathers, that employees are kind of like modern-day slaves.
Whoa, slaves. That seems a bit intense. He's not talking about actual slavery, right?
Of course not. He's using the term metaphorically to highlight the power dynamics you often see between bosses and workers.
Okay, I get that he's making a point, but how does that connect?
Taleb's saying that employees, because they depend on a steady paycheck and are worried about getting fired, actually have more skin in the game than they realize. They're driven to keep their bosses happy, follow the rules, avoid making waves, even if it means compromising their own values or working crazy hours for little reward.
So they're kind of trapped by their need for a secure income and the fear of losing their job.
That's the provocative argument he's making. And he contrasts this with entrepreneurs. They have a different kind of skin in the game because they're risking their own money and their future. Their success is tied directly to their ventures. More freedom and flexibility, but also greater risks and uncertainty.
So it's a trade-off then. Employees have more security and stability, but maybe less freedom and potential for big rewards. Entrepreneurs have more freedom and the chance to hit it big, but they also face bigger risks and more uncertainty.
Exactly. Taleb argues that both models have their pluses and minuses, but we need to be aware of those power dynamics and make sure the system's set up to be fair, hold people accountable, and strike a good balance between risk and reward.
Okay, makes sense. Now let's revisit those intellectual yet idiot types Taleb calls out.
Yeah.
What was his beef with them again?
The IYIs. Taleb's basically saying they're all about theoretical knowledge, but lack that practical, real-world understanding. Think about someone who can debate complex ideas, throw around statistics, write those super long, impressive-sounding articles, but then their ideas fall flat when you try to actually put them into practice.
Like those armchair experts,
Yeah.
right? Big talkers, but no real-world experience to back it up.
Exactly. Taleb says IYIs are often found in those ivory towers. Academia, think tanks, government. They love their complex models and theories, but they often miss how messy human behavior really is and how unpredictable the world can be.
So they might sound smart, but their ideas backfire when you actually try to put them into practice.
All the time. And what makes them dangerous is that they often have a say in decisions that affect a lot of people, but they don't face the consequences when things go wrong. They're shielded from that feedback that would force them to learn from their mistakes.
It's like they live in a bubble of abstract ideas, completely detached from the nitty-gritty reality of the world. And when their ideas get put into action, it's often other people who end up paying the price.
That's what Taleb is warning us about. He's arguing that true intelligence, the kind that's actually useful, requires both brains and practical wisdom, a recognition of the limits of what we know from books, and a willingness to adapt and learn from real-world experience.
So watch out for those smooth talkers with no real skin in the game, especially when their decisions could impact our lives.
Absolutely. And we got to be mindful of our own biases and blind spots too, right? We all tend to overestimate how much we know, and it's easy to think we have all the answers.
So a little humility goes a long way?
Big time. Recognizing the limits of our own knowledge and being willing to learn from others, especially those who have real skin in the game, is key to making smart choices in a world this complicated.
Okay, watch out for the IYIs, stay humble, and learn from those who have been in the trenches. Now, what about the Lindy effect? Taleb talks about that as a way to evaluate ideas and make decisions.
The Lindy effect is a fascinating concept. It basically says that the longer something has survived, the longer it's likely to survive in the future. This goes for ideas, tech, books, businesses, even social customs.
So the things that have stood the test of time, they're probably the most valuable and enduring, like the classic books that people keep reading generation after generation.
Exactly. If a book has been in print for centuries, translated into tons of languages, and still resonates with readers today, there's probably something special about it. It's survived countless challenges and changing tastes, suggesting that it contains timeless wisdom or insights.
It's like natural selection for ideas, right?
Yeah.
The best, the most resilient ones survive and thrive, while the fads and trends just fade away.
Perfect analogy. The Lindy effect gives us a way to evaluate things based on their track record. It's a valuable tool to help us navigate this world that's overflowing with information and competing claims of expertise.
Okay, so Lindy helps us separate what's truly valuable from what's just trendy. But how can we actually use this in our daily lives?
Think of the Lindy effect as a guide for making decisions. What should I read? What should I learn? What should I invest in? Even how should I live my life? By focusing on things that have a long history of success and survival, you increase your chances of encountering quality and wisdom, and you reduce your exposure to fads and distractions.
So let's say I'm trying to decide between a new self-help book everyone's buzzing about and a classic piece of literature that's been around for ages. The Lindy effect would say the classic is the better bet.
You got it. That classic work has already proven its worth, while the new self-help book might just be a flash in the pan.
And this goes beyond books, right? Investing strategies, business models, even relationship advice.
Absolutely. If you're looking at an investing approach that has consistently outperformed the market for decades, it's probably a safer bet than some new strategy based on the latest trends.
So stick with what's tried and true, the strategies that have a track record of success, and be cautious of those shiny new things that haven't been proven yet.
Great advice. It's about using the wisdom of the past to guide us in the present.
Love it. Okay, so the Lindy effect, a powerful way to evaluate ideas and make choices. Now, Taleb also talks about virtue and skin in the game. Can you refresh our memory on that?
Taleb believes that true virtue can exist without skin in the game. He's saying that genuine virtue requires taking risks, making sacrifices, being willing to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's unpopular or could cost you something.
So it's more than just good intentions or holding certain beliefs. You have to actually put those beliefs into action, even if it means putting something on the line.
You got it. True virtue means taking a stand, not just making empty gestures or virtue signaling for social approval.
Speaking of virtue signaling, it feels like that's become even more common in our social media world. Everyone's trying to project this perfect image, but it often feels so superficial.
It's everywhere these days. And Taleb warns that this kind of empty posturing is actually harmful. It creates the illusion of progress without actually addressing the real issues. It's like slapping a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
So true virtue requires more than just words, more than gestures. It's about taking action, showing commitment, being willing to put your skin in the game by taking risks and making sacrifices for what you believe in.
That's it. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Being willing to pay a price for your principles, whether that's financial, social, or even physical.
Okay, true virtue means risk, sacrifice, standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard. Now, Taleb also talks about how the way we present ourselves, how we look, can reveal a lot about our true nature. What's his take on that?
This is where Taleb challenges our assumptions about appearances and expertise. He says that in many fields, the people who truly have skin in the game often don't fit the stereotype. They're more focused on results than on looking the part.
So it's not about wearing the right clothes or having a fancy degree. It's about showing what you can do through your actions and your track record.
Exactly. He uses the example of successful traders. They might not wear those expensive suits or have a wall of diplomas, but they have this deep understanding of the markets and are willing to put their money on the line to make a profit. They've proven themselves through their results, not through their ability to talk a good game.
It's like those old school mechanics who might have grease under their fingernails, but can fix any engine you throw at them. They don't need some fancy certificate to prove their skill. Their work speaks for itself.
Perfect analogy. Taleb contrasts those practical experts with what he calls bullshitters, those who are all talk but don't have the skills or experience to back it up.
All style, no substance.
Exactly. And he warns us to watch out for these bullshitters, especially in fields where the stakes are high, like finance, medicine, or politics. We need to look past the superficial stuff and focus on the track record, the results, and the willingness to put our own skin in the game.
So don't be fooled by the fancy titles, the smooth talk, the impressive outfits. Look for those signs of real expertise, the battle scars, the lessons learned through experience.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Real competence often shines through experience, setbacks, and a willingness to take risks and learn from mistakes.
So be discerning. Right? Don't judge a book by its cover. Look for that skin in the game. Now, what about this business of intervention that Taleb talks about?
This is where Taleb criticizes those who try to solve problems in complex systems without actually having any skin in the game. He says they often make things worse because they don't truly understand the system they're messing with.
Like those well-meaning but clueless volunteers who show up after a disaster and end up creating more chaos than help.
Perfect analogy. Good intentions aren't enough. Their lack of experience can actually hinder the recovery efforts.
So it's not just about wanting to help. You also need the knowledge, the skills, the experience to actually make a positive difference.
Exactly. Taleb says this applies to all kinds of complex systems, from economies to ecosystems to social movements. He uses the example of those foreign policy interventions, where policymakers often make decisions that have massive consequences for people in other countries, but they face very little personal risk.
So they're making life-altering decisions for others, but they're not the ones who suffer if things go wrong.
That's the big problem Taleb is pointing out. This disconnect between decision-making and consequences can lead to reckless and irresponsible behavior.
And this isn't just about military intervention, right? It applies to other kinds of intervention, too.
Absolutely. Think about those economic policies designed to boost growth but end up causing bubbles and crashes. Or social programs meant to help people in need, but they create dependency and discourage people from working.
So good intentions aren't enough. You got to consider the unintended consequences and make sure those making decisions are held accountable for the outcomes.
That's what skin in the game is all about. It's about aligning incentives, promoting responsibility, and ensuring that those who benefit from success also share in the risks.
Okay, so be careful with those interventions, especially when the folks making the decisions aren't the ones who will face the consequences. Now, Taleb has some interesting observations about rich people, too.
Taleb doesn't have a problem with wealth itself. He's more concerned with how that wealth was acquired and the values that come with it. He's critical of those who get rich through manipulation, exploiting loopholes, or taking advantage of others. He argues that this type of wealth can lead to a distorted view of the world and a lack of skin in the game.
So it's like those lottery winners who suddenly have millions, but no clue how to handle money or create value. They end up making impulsive decisions that lead to their financial ruin.
Exactly. And Taleb points out that this disconnect can go beyond just money matters. Those who have and earn their wealth through hard work and risk-taking might not appreciate the value of things or understand the impact of their actions. They surround themselves with people who just tell them what they want to hear, lose sight of the struggles of everyday folks. It's a real disconnect.
It's like those stories you hear about celebrities or rich kids who seem to have it all but struggle with addiction, depression, a lack of purpose. Maybe because their wealth didn't come from real-world experiences and challenges.
That's a really interesting connection. Taleb argues that people who've earned their wealth through hard work and taking risks tend to be more grounded, more resilient, more grateful for what they have. They've been through tough times, learned from their setbacks, and understand the value of hard work and perseverance.
So it's not about hating on rich people. It's about recognizing that how you get wealth and what you value can deeply affect individuals and society.
That's the heart of it. Aligning wealth with virtue, responsibility, and a commitment to the greater good.
Not hating on the rich. Got it. It's about promoting a system that rewards those who work hard, come up with new ideas, and do the right thing. Now, Taleb also talks about an ancient idea, facta non verba, which seems super relevant today with all the social media posturing and empty promises. What does that mean again?
It's Latin for deeds, not words. Basically, a call to action, a reminder that your true character shines through what you do, not what you say.
It's like actions speak louder than words, right?
Exactly. Taleb argues that throughout history, people and groups who wanted to make a real impact understood this principle. He brings up a fascinating example, the Assassins, a secretive Islamic group from way back, known for their targeted killings.
Well, not assassins. What do they have to do with facta non verba?
They were masters of psychological warfare. They knew the power of reputation, of making sure their threats were believable. They actually rarely resorted to killing. They preferred these calculated acts of violence or intimidation to send a clear message.
So more about creating fear and uncertainty than actual widespread violence.
Exactly. They knew the threat of violence was often more effective than actually carrying it out, and they were willing to put their own skin in the game, showing they'd follow through, even if it meant facing retaliation or death.
They built a reputation for being ruthless and effective, making their enemies think twice before messing with them. Like that saying, it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both.
That's a pretty hardcore way to put it, but it gets at their strategy. And Taleb argues this facta non verba idea is still important today. Business deals, personal relationships, international relations, it applies everywhere.
So back up your words with actions, show you're committed, and making clear you're not just bluffing.
Right. Build that reputation, show you follow through, take responsibility, and can be trusted to do what you say you'll do.
Makes sense. It makes me think about the media these days. It's overwhelming, so much information, hard to know what to believe. How does this skin in the game idea fit into the media landscape?
That's a great question. Taleb argues that things have gotten really distorted because a lot of journalists and media outlets, they've forgotten about skin in the game. They care more about sensationalism, getting clicks, pushing their own agenda, rather than accuracy, fairness, being accountable for what they report.
So they're not really held responsible for the impact of their stories, even if they spread false information or hurt someone's reputation.
That's a major concern for Taleb. He argues that this lack of accountability creates a messed up system. Journalists get rewarded for being provocative, stirring up outrage, even if it means sacrificing truth and integrity.
It's like they're playing a game where the goal is to grab attention, no matter the cost. The more outrageous and divisive the story, the more eyes they get on it.
It's a vicious cycle, leading to more misinformation, more polarization, and ultimately eroding trust in institutions and making it harder to have real conversations about important issues.
So what can we do about it? How do we bring back accountability in the media?
Taleb suggests that one way is to make sure journalists and media outlets have more skin in the game, like requiring them to be transparent about their funding, holding them responsible for factual errors, and giving people ways to seek redress when their reputation is unfairly damaged.
So create a system with real consequences for spreading lies or behaving unethically. Make sure those who report the news have a stake in getting it right, in being honest and fair.
Exactly. It's about restoring trust in the media by making sure those who report the news are held to a higher standard and have a personal interest in providing accurate and fair information to the public.
So skin in the game, it helps us navigate the media world. Be critical of what you read and hear, question the motivations of those reporting the news, and look for signs that they're being accountable and honest. Now, Taleb also talks about how we disagree, how we argue, and how that connects to skin in the game. Can you refresh my memory on that?
Here, Taleb's asking us to approach intellectual debates honestly, fairly, and be willing to really listen to opposing viewpoints, even if we don't agree. He says it's wrong to attack someone for their exact words instead of what they meant to say.
So try to understand what they were getting at, the intent behind their words, rather than just focusing on a literal interpretation.
Exactly. We all make mistakes, we all say things we don't mean, and sometimes our words don't come out quite right. Taleb says we should give each other the benefit of the doubt and try to grasp the deeper message rather than jumping to conclusions or attacking each other.
So be generous with our interpretations. Assume good intentions, even when we disagree.
That's the heart of ethical disagreement. Super important, especially today when it's so easy to misunderstand each other or take things out of context, especially online.
Yeah, like a sarcastic comment can be read totally wrong if you don't know the person or the context.
Exactly. And Taleb argues that we should apply this principle of understanding not just to individuals, but also to groups, institutions, even whole cultures. We got to be open to different perspectives, willing to learn, instead of resorting to stereotypes or making assumptions.
It's about understanding how complex communication can be and trying to bridge those gaps between us rather than making them wider through misunderstandings.
Beautifully said. And it's a message we need now more than ever in our increasingly divided world.
So ethical disagreement, it's about understanding, compassion, seeing things from multiple perspectives. Now, Taleb also critiques something he calls virtue merchandising. What's that all about?
Virtue merchandising is when you use virtue as a marketing ploy or to boost your social status. It's about trying to look morally superior or super socially conscious without actually making sacrifices or taking risks.
Like those companies that slap a fair trade label on their products, but don't actually do anything to improve the working conditions in their factories.
Perfect example. Or those celebs who make big statements about social justice issues, but don't actually donate money or time to those causes.
So it's all for show, right? Creating an image rather than making a real difference.
Exactly. Taleb says this kind of virtue signaling actually hurts because it cheapens true virtue and makes people cynical.
It's like the boy who cried wolf, right?
Yeah.
If people keep hearing about virtue but don't see any real action or sacrifice behind it, they'll stop believing it altogether.
Great analogy. Taleb's saying we got to be more discerning when someone claims to be virtuous. Look beyond the words. Look at their actions, their sacrifices, and whether they're willing to put skin in the game.
True virtue is about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. It's about backing up your principles with action, even when it's tough or unpopular, and being wary of those who try to benefit from appearing virtuous without actually doing anything.
That's it in a nutshell. It's especially relevant in our social media age, where it's so easy to create this perfect image of ourselves and project an aura of moral superiority. We need to be more critical and look beyond the facade to see what's really going on.
So watch out for that virtue merchandising. Look for real action and sacrifice, and be skeptical of those who try to gain from virtue without putting their own skin in the game. Now, Taleb also makes this point that in our data-driven world, our actions reveal our true beliefs more accurately than our words, maybe even our thoughts. What does he call this again?
He calls it revealed preferences, the idea that what we actually do shows our true beliefs and values much more reliably than what we say or even what we think.
Actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. Taleb argues that we often fool ourselves and others about what we truly believe. Our actions, though, they don't lie. He gives a simple example, buying a lottery ticket. Someone might say they're responsible with money, laugh at gambling. But then they buy a lottery ticket. Their actions tell a different story.
Even if they don't admit it to themselves, their actions show they might believe in luck or are willing to risk a little money for a chance at a big win.
Exactly. And this revealed preferences thing applies everywhere. What we buy, who we hope for, how we treat each other. Our actions often show those hidden motives and biases we might not even realize we have.
So it's a way to see through our own self-deception and get to the bottom of what really drives us. And this doesn't just apply to individuals, right?
Of course not. By looking at the collective actions of a group or a whole society, we can learn about their shared values, priorities, even their hidden fears and desires.
Like how the popularity of certain products or the success of certain political campaigns can tell us a lot about what's going on in a society, its anxieties, and its hopes for the future.
Spot on. And Taleb argues that this revealed preferences idea is especially crucial in politics. Politicians make all sorts of promises and talk about lofty ideals, but what they actually do or don't do tells the real story.
So don't just listen to their speeches. Look at their voting record, their policy decisions, how they actually use their power and spend money.
Exactly. Revealed preferences. Cut through all the fancy talk and let us see the true priorities and commitments of those in charge.
Okay, revealed preferences, a powerful lens for understanding what's really going on. Now, Taleb also talks about inequality, but in a slightly different way than you usually hear in the media.
He doesn't ignore income inequality, but he says we need to be more specific about what kind of inequality is actually harmful. He focuses on what he calls inequality in risk-taking, or inequality in skin in the game.
So he's not just talking about the gap between the rich and the poor. He's looking at how risk and responsibility are shared in society.
Right. He argues that the worst kind of inequality is when those who make decisions that affect everyone else don't have to face the consequences. They enjoy the benefits when things go well, but are protected when things go bad.
It's like those CEOs who get huge bonuses when the company's booming, but then get golden parachutes when their decisions lead to layoffs or bankruptcy.
Classic example. Or politicians who support wars or economic policies that have terrible consequences for ordinary people, but don't face any personal hardship or loss of status themselves.
So they make decisions that have a massive impact on people's lives, but they're not really putting their own skin in the game.
That's the core issue. And Taleb argues that this imbalance, this asymmetry in risk and responsibility, is a recipe for disaster. It leads to reckless behavior, a lack of accountability, and a breakdown of trust in our institutions.
So we need systems where those who make decisions are also held accountable for the outcomes. They need to have some skin in the game so they're more likely to act responsibly and consider the impact of their choices on everyone else.
Exactly. It's about aligning incentives, making things fairer, and ensuring that those who benefit from success also share in the risks. It's about understanding that true leadership involves not just making decisions, but also taking responsibility for the results of those decisions.
Okay, so inequality isn't just about the gap between rich and poor. It's about how risk and responsibility are distributed in society. And we need to watch out for those who make decisions that affect others without putting anything of their own on the line. Now, Taleb also brings up a concept that sounds kind of abstract, ergodicity. Can you explain that and why it's relevant to skin in the game?
Ergodicity, it's a bit of a technical term, but basically it challenges the idea that we can predict the future based solely on what happened in the past. It highlights the difference between what happens to a group over time and what happens to a single person over their lifetime.
So like looking at the average lifespan of a population versus the actual lifespan of any individual. The average might be 75, but that doesn't mean everyone will live that long.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
And Taleb says a lot of people, especially those in power, make decisions based on this flawed understanding of risk and probability. They think what worked before will always work, but they forget that complex systems are unpredictable, and sometimes those rare catastrophic events happen.
Like those investors who assume the stock market will always go up because it's mostly gone up in the past, they might be in for a rude awakening when the next crash happens.
That's it. And Taleb argues that this kind of blind optimism is especially dangerous when we're talking about things like financial markets, climate change, or even global conflicts. These systems are complex, interconnected, and fundamentally unpredictable. Our decisions need to reflect that reality.
So we need a dose of humility about predicting the future and be more aware that unexpected things can and do happen. Our decisions need to be based on a realistic view of risk, and a willingness to adapt to change.
Absolutely. And Taleb says that having skin in the game can actually help us make smarter decisions in uncertain times. When we have something to lose, we're more cautious, think more long term, and consider the potential consequences.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right? When we're forced to deal with real risks and challenges, we get creative and make better choices.
Love it. It highlights why it's so important to have a stake in the outcome, to be personally invested in whether our decisions succeed or fail.
Okay. Ergodicity reminds us that the future isn't always a straight line from the past. We got to be ready for the unexpected and make decisions that can handle curveballs. Taleb also talks about how skin in the game isn't just about protecting ourselves, it's also about looking out for others.
Right. He argues that our skin is often tied to the skin of others. Our actions, especially when we have power or influence, create ripples that reach beyond us, impacting our families, our communities, even future generations.
No man is an island, right?
Exactly.
Oh.
We're all interconnected. What we do affects others, whether we mean it to or not. And that brings in a whole ethical dimension. We have to consider the impact of our choices on those around us, especially those who are more vulnerable.
It makes you think about those whistleblowers who put their careers and reputations on the line to expose wrongdoing. They're putting their skin in the game to protect others.
That's a powerful example. And Taleb argues that we need systems that protect and encourage whistleblowers because they're essential for holding the powerful accountable and promoting transparency and ethical behavior.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves. It's also about speaking up when we see injustice, even if it puts us at risk.
That's what ethical leadership is all about. Having the courage to do what's right, even when it's tough or unpopular.
Skin in the game has this moral side. It's about our connections and acting responsibly toward others. Now, Taleb doesn't shy away from tough topics like terrorism and violence. How does skin in the game fit into that?
It's a tough one, but Taleb suggests that to deter terrorism and violence, we need to make it absolutely clear that those who commit these acts and those who support them will face serious consequences, and those consequences might extend to their families and communities.
That's definitely controversial, but I can see the logic. If people know that their actions will have huge consequences for those they care about, they might think twice before resorting to violence or supporting it.
That's the idea. Increase the stakes, the skin in the game, to discourage harmful actions. But of course, this has to be done in a way that respects human rights and avoids punishing innocent people.
It's a tough balancing act. We need to find ways to prevent violence and hold people responsible, but also avoid creating more suffering or fueling cycles of revenge.
That's the challenge. And Taleb says finding that balance requires understanding human psychology, taking a nuanced approach to justice, and being willing to have tough conversations about the root causes of violence and conflict.
So skin in the game has a place in dealing with conflict and security, but it requires careful, ethical thinking. Taleb also goes deep into the nature of belief. How does that connect to skin in the game?
Taleb says that really believing something goes beyond just agreeing with it intellectually or feeling strongly about it. True belief requires action, sacrifice, a willingness to put your skin in the game by living in accordance with your beliefs, even when it's hard or could cost you something. He's critical of what he calls cheap signaling beliefs, the ones that are easy to talk about but don't require any real commitment or sacrifice.
So, like those people who say they're passionate about a cause but don't actually donate or volunteer their time to support it.
Exactly. Or those who preach certain political or religious views but don't live their lives in a way that reflects those beliefs. Their words might sound good, but their actions show a lack of true commitment.
So it's not enough to just believe it in your head or in your heart. You got to live it. The choices you make, the risks you're willing to take for what you believe in. That's what matters.
Right on. Taleb argues that this kind of belief, the kind that's backed up by action and sacrifice, is not only more authentic, it's more powerful too. It can inspire others, create change, make a real difference in the world.
Like those historical figures who risked everything for what they believed in, whether it was freedom, justice, equality. Their actions inspired countless others to join them.
Great examples. And Taleb argues this skin in the game principle applies not just to those big historical figures, but to all of us in our daily lives. Whether it's our commitment to our families, our communities, or our personal values, true belief requires putting something on the line, taking a risk, and living in a way that shows our deepest convictions.
Wow, we've really covered a lot in this deep dive into skin in the game. From ancient Babylonian law to social media trends, from the stock market to the human mind. It's been a journey. What are some key takeaways our listeners can use in their own lives?
I'd say one of the biggest is to make sure incentives are aligned. Those who make decisions should feel the consequences too. This matters in everything: personal relationships, work, politics, you name it. When we have skin in the game, we're more likely to act responsibly, think long term, and consider how our actions affect others.
It's about owning our choices, admitting when we're wrong, and learning from those experiences. It's about understanding that actions have consequences, and we're not just playing with monopoly money.
Well said. Another takeaway is to stay skeptical, question everything, and look for evidence to support or challenge what we're told. We're flooded with information these days, but not all of it is reliable. Be critical, think for yourself, and be wary of those who try to mislead you.
Be a critical thinker. Don't just accept things blindly. Dig deeper, ask questions, consider different perspectives.
Exactly. And finally, I think Taleb's really emphasizing the importance of courage. Stand up for what you believe in, even when it's hard or unpopular. Don't be afraid to go against the grain, to challenge the status quo, to put your reputation and your resources on the line for something you believe in. True courage isn't about being reckless or impulsive. It's about taking calculated risks, standing by your principles, and making a real impact on the world.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time, keep those minds curious and remember, always have some skin in the game.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Book of Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our growing community. Click the bell icon so you never miss an update. We have so much more inspiring content coming your way.